It's 90 degrees outside and I'm sweating like a in church. Listen, this is the Outlaw RR2160 Mark II, and today we're going to talk about it. It's an integrated amp, it's full featured, and it's only $999. Let's get those main specs on screen so you guys can check that out. I'll tell you about some specs and standout features, what makes this amplifier unique. I will also tell you what it sounds like and how it compares to some other amplifiers, especially putting emphasis on what you can expect if this is your first major upgrade. Maybe you're coming from a $100 amp. Maybe you're coming from a $400 or $500 amp. What can you expect stepping up to something like that, like the Outlaw RR2160, and is it even worth it? Let's jump into it. So first and foremost, as far as standout features go, this is a full featured integrated amplifier, and oh my goodness, do I mean it. 4 analog inputs, plus phono, internet radio, onboard DAC, Burr Brown, good sound to it, 4 digital inputs, USB inputs, tone controls, onboard bass management. You want to low pass and high pass your mains? This amplifier can do it. You've got a few different preset frequencies via a rear toggle switch where you can high pass your mains and low pass your sub for easy, simple subwoofer setup. On top of the tone controls, you've also got a speaker EQ button that's going to boost the bass at certain frequencies should you wish to do that. For the bulk of my review, I left the tone controls neutral. I didn't have any bass boosts going on. I wanted to listen to this thing in its purest form. Let me see if I'm leaving out any features. You even got a headphone output. You can dim the front panel. You got a remote control. This thing has options, ladies and gentlemen. And you have A and B sets of speakers. There's a lot going on here. So another standout feature besides all the features that it has is going to be the wattage and the way Outlaw Audio measures said wattage, because they are one of the few companies that do it properly. Listen to me. 8 ohms, 110 watts, 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz wideband, 0.05% THD. Now that's not that uncommon for a spec. A lot of amplifier companies give us the honest truth at their 8 ohm spec. They give us 20 to 20. They reference the THD. What's extremely rare is an amplifier company giving us that same data at 4 ohms. Almost no one gives us a 4 ohm wideband figure. Most companies don't even mention what the reference is. The few that do use 1 kilohertz as a reference. That is absolutely going to boost that 4 ohm figure, make it more marketable. Outlaw Audio is not playing games here. They're giving you the honest to God's truth 4 ohm specs. 165 watts, wideband, RMS, both channels driven, 20 to 20, 0.05% THD. Hat is off to them. Love to see it. I have been talking about companies kind of fudging the 4 ohm spec for years. I'll be honest, this is the reason I accepted this review sample. I had to put respect on this company's name because they're one of the only ones that are like 4 ohms. We're not scared. We'll give you the real spec, 20 to 20, wide band. They're not going to fudge the numbers. They're going to give you the THD reference. Thank you. Oh my goodness. And look, that's not to say that companies that don't provide those specs or that their amplifiers sound bad necessarily or lack power. Most other companies' amplifiers that don't give us those specs, most of them have decent power too, just not as much as they'd like you to believe. Outlaw Audio is telling the truth. Sorry if I got a little too passionate about that or went on a little bit too long, but it matters to me. I appreciate it. I want this to be industry standard. Wideband power figures, both channels driven, 20 to 20 with the THD reference. Okay, moving on. I've told you about the features, standout features. The size, this thing's a chunky boy. It's a full-size unit, detachable power cord as well. Nice retro design, very thick front aluminum plate. What does it sound like? Who cares about the onboard bass management, the 4 inputs, the built-in Burr Brown DAC? That sounds great. Who cares about all that if the amplifier at its core doesn't deliver good, clean power and a good sound? So what does it sound like? Well, You get good clean output. The amp is mostly neutral, whether we're talking about treble, mid-range, or bass. The Outlaw RR2160 isn't here to color the presentation. It's not here to make things warm and tonally rich. It's not here to make the top end sound sharp or overly detailed or analytical. It's not here to artificially expand and cool the mid-range. It's not here to boost up bass and give you extra juice. No, it is here to give you the sound the way it's supposed to sound. If you want to alter that sound, you've got tone controls. You want to alter it more, you can add the DAC of your choosing or source of your choosing that may color it further, or a set of speakers that are going to have the predominant sound you're looking for. The amplifier at its core, mostly a neutral affair. Again, treble, mid-range, bass doesn't matter. In the top end though, let's talk about some things. There is good air and space in the treble region, and it does sound fairly effortless and fairly refined for the money. Moving down in the mid-range, again, it is fairly open, fairly expansive, and fairly effortless. Moving down to the bass, good bass control, regardless what kind of speakers I was using, whether they were hard to drive or easy to drive, whether they were bass monsters or hardly had any bass at all. The Outlaw RR2160 was effortless, clean, and clear with its bass delivery. Did you notice I used one descriptor when I talked about treble, mid-range, and bass? I used the exact same descriptor, effortlessness. That's what this amp brings to the table. Its presentation overall is fairly refined for the money, mostly a neutral affair, and very effortless. That gives a nice open sound, whether you're at lower volumes or louder volumes, and this sucker can get plenty loud. So that's what it sounds like. How does it compare to some other amplifiers? So let's talk about what you could expect if you're coming from the ultimate budget category. You've got something like a Yamaha RS202. That's an amplifier that's full MSRP is like $189. It's a decent amplifier for the money. It's not a piece of junk or anything like that. But what you can expect upgrading to something like the Outlaw RR2160, besides the slew of added features you're going to get, which I've already mentioned a few times now, you're going to get a much more open treble region, a lot more detail and detail retrieval, a soundstage that is much more expansive. Moving down to the mid-range, same thing, much more expansive mid-range. Vocalists are going to project more into the room. There's going to be more air, space, and presence around them. You're going to notice more holographics. Moving down to the bass region, you're going to notice a ton more bass control coming from something inexpensive, again, like that Yamaha RS202. Or I can't remember the name, that inexpensive Sony, that's like $200. The Outlaw RR2160 is going to be able to drive speakers to much louder volumes compared to something like that inexpensive Yamaha. So if you like to rock out occasionally and you noticed your inexpensive amplifier seems to run out of power, that's going to be one of the areas where the Outlaw RR2160 is just not really going to have an issue regardless of what kind of speakers you guys put to it. 120 watts wideband at 8 ohm or 165 watts wideband at 4 ohms is a good amount of power, guys. So maybe that's not the kind of amp you have. Maybe you have something that's more in that $500 price range, something like a Denon PMA 600 NE. What can you expect stepping up to the Outlaw RR2160? Is it still worth it? I think so. The Denon PMA 600 NE is a decent amplifier. There's nothing wrong with it for $500. But you put it up against something like the Outlaw RR2160 Mark II, that's double the price, and you're going to get a substantial improvement just across the board. The Denon PMA 600 NE is going to sound congested and forced at all frequencies by direct comparison. That's how big the difference is when you step up to something like this unit. And look, I'm not trying to sell this to you. It doesn't matter to me if you buy it or not, guys. I don't use affiliate links. I don't take commissions, nor do I get to keep the review sample. I'm just telling you how it is. I had the Denon PMA 600 NE here. I actually bought that one with my own money when I reviewed it, because back then my channel was so much smaller. Anyways, I digress. Back to the comparison. So, the Denon PMA 600 NE, it's a fine amplifier at $500, but again, it's going to sound congested compared to something like this. And I'm not saying this Outlaw is bright or on the forward side of neutral. No, it is just so much more refined and so much more effortless. The Denon PMA 600 NE is going to sound closed off. That Outlaw is going to give you more airspace and separation in the treble, a more open and expansive and holographic mid-range with more air and space around the vocalist, and again, much stronger bass control. and just a better note-to-note distinction in that bass region. Now, how does the Outlaw compare to something that's its price? That's a great question. Some of you guys might be like, okay, I know $1,000 amplifier is what I want. There's this bad boy, and then there's something like the Emotiva TA2 that's got a similar feature set. What is the difference? Listen, I'm not going to lie to you guys. Those are both fantastic amplifiers. And I know some of you guys might wonder about the Iota VX SA40. I haven't reviewed that yet. I will maybe in 1 or 2 weeks. And when I review that, I'll talk about how it compares to this. Maybe I'll do another video where I compare all 3 amps at the same time just for simplicity's sake. But right now, let's compare this to the Emotiva TA2. This is $999. Emotiva TA2 is $899. They're only $100 apart. Both amplifiers have good rock solid power. Emotiva does rate their 4 ohm figure at 1 kilohertz, so it is going to seem a lot higher than the Outlaw. Emotiva's 4 ohm figure is 200 watts a channel, but that's at 1 kilohertz. That's an easier test than the 20 to 20 Outlaw does. So I'd say as far as wattage goes, both amps are probably about equal. They have a similar feature set. They both have a lot of inputs, outputs, onboard DAC, and they both have onboard bass management. So let me tell you what I like more about one or the other. Maybe this will help you decide. But again, guys, these are both 2 really good amplifiers. We are splitting hairs a little bit, and I'd almost say buy based off of aesthetics, because the 2 amplifiers look very different. That Outlaw is like a modern retro look. The Emotiva is more of a utilitarian look. Anyhow, I digress. So let's talk about that onboard bass management. Both amplifiers have it. The Emotiva gives you a little bit more fine-grained control. You can twist the knobs and it's more variable, I guess you could say, on where you choose to have that high pass and low pass. The Outlaw is more fixed options by way of a 4-way toggle switch, and it can be bypassed as well on either amplifier. I like Emotiva's implementation just a little bit more. Outlaw's implementation is a little bit easier to use, however. It's kind of a toss-up, but I kind of like the Emotiva's onboard bass management just a smidgen more. But as far as sound quality differences in that bass management, there are none. They both do it really well. Let's talk about remote controls. The Outlaw gives you a full-size remote control that I think is way too big. But conversely, the Emotiva gives you a remote control that is way too small and feels cheap. Neither one's a win in my opinion. Remote controls seem to be a really tough thing for amplifier manufacturers to nail down. But the good news, both remote controls work really well. Let's talk about the onboard DACs. I actually like the onboard DAC of the Outlaw a little bit more than the Emotiva. This may come down to personal preference, however. The fidelity difference between the two isn't really the takeaway here. It's more the tonal character. The Burr Brown DAC inside the Outlaw is going to lean ever so slightly warmer when compared directly to something like the analog devices that's inside the Emotiva TA2, which is going to lean to be a little bit more detailed and analytical. One is not necessarily better than the other. It's just about what you like. I'm trying to think what are some other differences between the two here. I'd say that Outlaw does seem to be just a little bit more effortless at lower volumes. So if you do listen at real low volumes, figure 65 to 70 dB, you might like the slightly more effortless presentation of the Outlaw. The Emotiva seems to like to play a little bit louder. That's when its soundstage likes to open up. The Outlaw soundstage seems to open up just a little bit earlier in the volume knob. But the two amplifiers are really good, guys. That's the comparison between those two. I think that's it. I think that's every comparison I wanted to do. Let's recap. The RR2160 is a full-featured amplifier, sells for $999. You get a ton of features, onboard bass management, tone controls, digital inputs, analog inputs. I mean, you know, you can put a USB drive in there. So many options, right? The sound character, mostly neutral, fairly refined for the money, and fairly good at low volumes. Stage is fairly good, can drive just about any pair of speakers you've got. It's pretty much a winner as long as you like the aesthetics. You know what I'm saying? That's really what it comes down to, guys. I believe this brings this video to a close, and I believe I've told you everything I wanted to tell you about the Outlaw RR2160 Mark II. If you got any questions, this YouTube channel does have a free Discord. Link is in the description of all my videos, or you can ask me in the YouTube comments section below. Please, 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 when asking a question, make sure to include context, ladies and gentlemen. And don't ask me to compare this to something where the price just doesn't make sense. Don't be like, how does this amp compare to a Pathos? That's crazy. You know, the cheapest Pathos I reviewed was almost $4,000. But also, don't ask me if this is going to be enough for your room. That's a tough question to answer, guys. Listening habits. But honestly, if an amplifier like this isn't enough for your room, I don't know what to tell you, because this thing can get insanely loud in my room and with the different speakers I tried. Anyways, I'm rambling now. Let's wrap it up. Until next time, take care.